Now, Conservative MPs have accused David Cameron of sniping at Israel over its handling of the situation in Gaza and have claimed that the Foreign Office shows anti-Israel sentiment. A group of Tory MPs are set to raise concerns with the Foreign Secretary at the meeting on Tuesday, and David Cameron has said that he was deeply concerned about the prospect of a military offensive in Rafah and that Israel's performance in making aid available would have consequences for the UK's assessment about whether Israel is compliant with international law. So do we need to be more stringent in our support of Israel? Joining me now, clashing head-to-head, GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and also Reform UK's deputy leader Ben Habib. Right, I'll start with you, Nigel Nelson.
I think David Cameron's right.
You do?
The position of the British government at the moment is for a ceasefire. The words are slightly different depending on the party. The government calls it a humanitarian pause. But broadly, we and the Americans are on the same page. There needs to be a ceasefire, aid needs to get into Gaza, and the hostages need to be released. Now, none of that is actually withdrawing any kind of support from Israel. That the government have made very clear, rightly so, Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel has a right to exist. We all believe those things, but it's long-standing policy, again, both by the Americans and the British, for a two-state solution. So what David Cameron is saying is, don't go and invade Rafah, that the Israelis told people that to go south. Rafah is the southernmost city in Gaza. It was meant to be a safe space. It's not any longer.
Well, that's because Hamas have gone into it, haven't they? Hamas are living in Rafah.
That's the Israeli argument.
Well, they are.
But these people
Isn't this where the missiles are being fired from?
These people have nowhere else to go. So if there was to be an invasion...
Well, perhaps he could ask the focus on Hamas stopping the firing and get Hamas...
I'm not defending Hamas for 1 second.
But we want to hear... I mean, if I speak to some of the Jewish people, they want to hear David Cameron, if he's going to be speaking, saying release the hostages, number one, and also stop firing the missiles, because if Hamas stopped firing...
That goes along with...
this would end.
That's part of a ceasefire, and obviously both sides have to actually call the ceasefire and respect it.
But it feels like there's too much focus on Israel to stop firing. But what do you think?
Yeah, so... But before I answer the question, can I just make a distinction between what we were discussing, which is what's happening in the United Kingdom, which has gone completely wrong, with what we are now discussing, which is our foreign policy in the Middle East. And I think it's incredibly rich of David Cameron to be... calling Israel out, when David Cameron single-handedly set the Middle East ablaze in 2011, along with, well, I say single-handedly, Barack Obama and him acted in concert to turn Libya into a failed state. They very nearly turned Egypt into a failed state. They turned Syria into a failed state. They nearly destabilised Saudi. And whatever we think about Saudi, we need that relationship with Saudi Arabia to be strong. And they very nearly did the same in Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. Cameron had no right to promote the Arab Spring. For Cameron now to be stirring up trouble in the Middle East is beyond redemption. But where the British government is really getting it wrong is that they are not looking at the real conflict. The real conflict here, in geopolitical terms, is not between Israel and Gaza and the Palestinians. The real conflict is between the West and Saudi on one hand, and Iran and Russia on the other. And where we should be really helping shutting down this violence, shutting down this war, is by tackling the Qataris, who are acting as a funnel for money into Hamas. I'm broadening it. But if we really want to stop this war, and we want Hamas brought to its knees, you've got to stop the flow of money, and you've got to stop the flow of arms.
But David Cameron really is powerless to do that. So this is why he's clearly
we've got
focusing
Qataris all over London. We've got Qatari investments in London. We can bring a lot
maybe that's the problem.
Well, that may be the problem, but we've got to be honest about what the problem is. We've got to face it. The reason Iran...
But that's further down the road, though, isn't it?
No. It's right now. It's right now we've got to cut off money to Hamas.
But we need a ceasefire to actually get the aid into Gaza.
Why do you need the ceasefire to stop? I'm just curious as to why that should be the order. If you can get in there, and if you really are serious about it and you can restrict something, then why do you need to force them to ceasefire? The only people that will stop firing are the Israelis.
Because you can't get the aid in otherwise. At the moment, the Americans...
Yeah, but that's because Hamas won't stop firing the rockets.
Nigel,
stop firing the rockets, isn't it?
We're talking about the war. We're talking about bringing Hamas to its knees and how do you stop the war. The only way the Israelis are going to back off is if Hamas is neutered. The only way to neuter Hamas in any form of sort of humanitarian way is to stop its flow of arms, stop its flow of money. And that is via Qatar, and that is from Iran. And I wrote an article at the beginning of this war saying that we've got to recognise the true causes of what's going on.
I take your point about Qatar and Iran, but just taking Iran, what do you expect us to actually do about that now?
Well, we've got sanctions against Iran, but
humanitarian disaster is happening now in Gaza.
We've got to have sanctions against Qatar. We've got to up our game.
I'm thinking about Iran. Iran is obviously a bigger player in the region.
No, but the money's going through Qatar.
Yes, but Iran is behind the whole thing. What are you suggesting we do about Iran?
Well, we've already got sanctions against Iran.
Yes, we have. Yeah.
And we've got to take to task the Houthis and all the other mechanisms by which Iran brings instability to the Middle East. And a key component of that is tackling Qatar. And unless the British government wakes up...
I've got your point about getting the middleman. What I'm asking you is, how do you think we can tackle Iran in the short term? The short term being to try and stop the disaster that's unfolding in Gaza.
Yeah. Well, that's you cut off the flow of money through Qatar. The money's coming through Qatar. That's where it's coming from. That's how Hamas are getting their money.
Obviously, clearly, if you stop the flow of cash that is supplying these people for the firing these rockets, then once the rockets stop firing from Hamas, and I think that is the end.
The war is over.
The war's over. So I don't quite understand why everyone's sort of saying, Israel, put down your arms. Yes, Israel would love to put their arms down.
But it is both of them. And we're not talking about a single-handed.
No, but I'm saying one is willing to stop and the other is not.
Well, who's willing to stop?
Well, I think the Israelis are willing to stop.
Well, there's no sign of that. They keep pulling out of the negotiations.
Well, that's probably because there's probably ridiculous. Where are the hostages? They're asking for the hostages, aren't they?
Well, they are.
That's why they're pulling out of the negotiations.
But at the moment, the feel you get from Tel Aviv is that they want to win the war, which is fair enough. They want to destroy Hamas, fair enough. We're all on side for that. And as a result of that, they're reluctant to let up while they're doing that. In the meantime, women and children are being killed.
I think you're slightly misrepresenting it. The women and children are being killed, and it's a war, and it's awful, but they both need to stop firing the rockets. But the people that won't stop appear to be, in my view, Hamas. That's all I see.
And I think Israel's not boxing clever. But Israel needs to redefine what its war aim is, and it needs to draw America and the UK into cutting Hamas off at the knees.
Well, that would be great if we could all cut Hamas off at the knees. This would be over, wouldn't it? So I think the point here is that David Cameron appears to be focusing heavily on Israel instead of actually, I think he could go a bit deeper and deal with the conflict differently.